Well, welcome to Talking Automotive with Mark and John. Today, we've got a guest speaker who is very much a data specialist. We've got Ben Sullivan. He's the head of automotive services at Potentiate and also the managing director at AdClarity. Now, Ben covers off some amazing information around three critical pieces to this industry: happy customers buying, happy service customers, and happy dealers. John Sinclair.
Yeah, Mark, thanks very much. I think Ben brings across a lot of really good points and the necessity to get across the detail. They have a huge amount of information that they provide both to the OEMs and the dealers, and it's so important to get involved in this detail and to really understand it. So I think to me there were some interesting facts that came out about the ownership, vehicle ownership, about retention, and having more understanding of that allows you to better market and focus your sales efforts in the key parts to achieve your sales targets. So definitely a good listen. So let's jump into it.
If you want more detail about today's episode, please subscribe on LinkedIn and also subscribe below on YouTube, and make sure you tick the bell on YouTube so you get updates with all the subsequent podcasts. We've got some great information we can get you from Ben, but please reach out to us on LinkedIn for John Sinclair or Mark Pallavestra, or leave us a message on YouTube. Well, you're the head of automotive services at Potentiate. Now, Potentiate is all about the data. You mentioned you're a data dag. Well, I must admit I'm a data dag as well, because data tells us everything.
Yes.
And what we're keen to cover off today is, I think, what is the most important survey of all when it comes to the auto industry, which is the new car buyer survey. And my first question I'm keen to ask is, what are the macro trends that you're seeing in the new car buyer survey, and what have they been over the 1, 2, and 3 year periods, or even greater?
Yeah, great question. There's a couple of things that are sort of intertwined that we're seeing. The first one was something that I noted in a study back in about 2005, which was really that the population projections indicated that we were going to get older. The Australian population is simply aging. Coupled with that, been partly to do with, when I was born way back, average, births per woman was 2.3. It's now at about 1.6. In other words, we are not naturally replacing our population. Ironically, in a world where we talk about immigration, the only reason our population is staying stable is because of immigration. And frankly, if we don't have more immigration, there will be no tax base left to pay tax or to work as the boomers get older. Now, what's interesting is that clearly has, and coupled with the fact that the boomers, as people would know, richest generation ever, they are increasingly dominant part of the automotive industry. In fact, to the point that last year, for the first time, 50% of all new car buyers were over 50. And
wow. That is huge. Half the market's over 50.
Yep. And to make that even more interesting, I think, because you kind of think about car markets as being all about families, for example. Now, there's another macro trend going on along with the population aging, and they're interrelated, is that household structures are changing. So in about a year or two's time, we're going to get to the point where couple households are the same number as children households. So even though you might kind of feel like most households are with kids, that's not going to be true for very much longer. But within that sort of subtle shift that's happening, what it's also doing is, and coupled with the economic environment, is that families with children are no longer a dominant part of the market. In fact, they make up around about 35% of the market. In other words, what's that? 65% are either singles or couples, and most of them are older singles or couples. And obviously part of this increase in single people household is, is because partners dying, at older ages, but also because there are increasing numbers of people who simply choose to not have children, which is, again, perfectly fine. But it also just means the types of cars that we want changes. So while that's been going on, there's been a couple of other really interesting things. I'm old enough to remember before the SUV boom, but essentially what's happened is we've moved away from what you'd call the big tough four-wheel drives and increasingly into these lifestyle SUVs. And I mean, I remember not so long ago, small cars, biggest segment, 25% of the market. Before that, it was large cars, but large cars have been going off a cliff for 20 years, if not longer. However, small cars last year were down under 20% of the market, the private, and small fleet market, whereas medium SUVs were now the biggest segment. What's perhaps surprising, again, if you look at the good old marketers, that's all about families, right? But yet most medium SUV buyers do not have children. They are, in fact, older couples.
That's amazing, because having come from OEM land,
yeah,
we always would talk about the medium SUV, which is the family car, and the need for 7 seats, and it's got to be for the blended family even.
Yeah, but no, it doesn't hold up. And again, the large SUVs perhaps do look like that. They are more family. But the medium SUVs are just the right size for an older couple as well. And yet the other thing that I kind of love about, and I remember when I started saying it, people really, I don't think, believe me, but it's so evident in the data, is that part of the reason that the older couples are liking the SUVs is they're a lot easier to get in and out of. Good old hips and knees. That is what's so nice about them. I've got some ride height, but I've got ease of entry and egress, and I think we forget sometimes those little minutiae, and again, it's probably a general observation on the industry. We focus on features, not benefits as a whole. We talk about, it's got this, but tell me what does that do for me? I think if salespeople, for example, could be much better at understanding what a feature does for you, you can, and something as simple as the ride height, the seat is simply higher, means it's easier on your old knees and hips to get in and out of. That's a really good point. We see it in the data so often. That's also behind the, I guess, continuing decline of the small car with the rise of the small SUV and even the light SUV. They are simply easier to get in and out of. You fall into a small car, whereas you sit into an SUV. Just that little bit of extra ride height, and all of a sudden they're easy to get in and out of. So there are a couple of bigger trends. One other thing I think has been really fascinating as I guess an expression of Australian maleness or machismo, shall we say. When I was a kid, it was all about the big V8, the rear wheel drive, maybe it was a ute, which is not really a ute, which is really just a car with a tray on the back. Maybe that was where it was, and when Bathurst mattered. These days, the mythology has changed slightly. It's all about your four-wheel drive ute, the 4x4 utes. You look like you're rugged, you look like you can go anywhere, and it's a tip of the hat to the wife because it's got 4 seats, or 5 seats. I can fit the family in there too. And better than that, I could even use it for work during the week and play on the weekend. And I think there's been an interesting, that kind of middle-aged male, what they want now mostly across urban Australia is the utes. And ironically, I think it places Australia in a very almost backward-looking position. You look at Europe, and they're all they're into smaller cars. And ironically, Australia is about the most metropolitan population in the world. However, we all want to buy utes. Well, I don't personally, but nevertheless, I can see the appeal. Don't get me wrong, but they're kind of old school cars. It's almost like we're regressing a little bit, I think. In some ways, technologically, the last vestige of the diesel internal combustion engine.
Around the retention periods, are people holding onto cars longer? And what would be the average retention period for the various segments or age groups?
Another really interesting question. If I've been working in this industry a long time, and the mythology, and I read an interesting article in Car Sales yesterday, but it was from a while ago, where the industry seems to think the average length is about 3 years, or about the length of warranty. People turn their cars over. But nothing in all of the 20 years of data I've been looking at have I ever seen that anywhere near true. Average new to new purchase So I buy a new car. When on average do I buy again? Last year, it was at about 7.8 years. So let's call it 8 years. So in other words, even with a 5-year warranty, most people own their car 3 years longer than that. Now, obviously, what that also tells us is that 50% of people own it more than 8 years. And in fact, about 25% of the market replace a new car that was over 12 years old.
Wow.
So now there's some really important implications for that one too. That probably a couple of little things that has been going up of late, but it's been because the short cyclists have stopped. You know, essentially the people who buy on lease or simply turn a car over. So in other words, the proportion of the market that is being bought by people replacing cars less than 4 years old is what has really collapsed. You know, so essentially people are just delaying purchase because the cars are good and they don't need to. It's now that kind of question of need versus want. I don't know. I've certainly had spent quite a number of years with my children trying to work on the distinction or the difference between need and want. You know, oh, I need a new this. No, you don't. You want one. You don't need it. You know, and I think that's what's happening in the car industry. There's less want, there's more need. You know, a greater proportion of the market is need. Now, the other fun thing I think about that age, again, we forget about it. You know, I think we've talked about it before, guys, that, you know, we all live in this industry and we watch it all the time. Whereas if the average person, you know, if the person who's going to buy a car in 2020, on average, they last bought in 2012. And in fact, a good chunk of those people bought last before 2010. That's a long time ago. Cars were really different back then. And what it also means is a lot of this technology that's now in the cars that we all look at and go, oh, yeah, well, that's been around forever, is new to most people. You know, all of these, you know, these safety things, lane changing, reverse sensors, you know, people don't really get it. And everything is exciting. You know, so often we forget that the last time a customer came into the market was a long time ago on average. They don't know much. They had to re-educate themselves to the market before they came into a dealership. And quite frankly, they're a little bamboozled, I think, a lot of them, you know, and we treat them that way. But, you know, not always the case.
Ben, in terms of between commercial and private buyers, is there any differentiation of retention between those two groups?
There is a marginal difference. It's kind of like luxury. So I didn't mention luxury. I should have meant that luxury cars on average are about 6 years old. And that's the same for the SMEs. Again, one of the things that we've seen as a result of changing rules around company fleets and all those sort of things, it is increasingly people are buying their own cars, but using them for private and business use at the same time. So there's a couple of other interesting shifts going on, but yeah, they're still about the same. Yeah, it's about 6 or 7 years for commercial vehicles. Again, despite what everybody thinks. And you know why I think that is, frankly? If you look at how those commercial vehicles are kitted out and the sort of stuff that needs to go on them, I don't blame them for putting it off. Yeah, it's a lot of hassle to start moving all of your toolboxes and all of those sorts of things. You know, if the car's working fine, why would you? Cars are expensive. They lose money. You know, as much as we might get excited by them, they're not money-making exercises.
And it's interesting, Ben, because with depreciation, the car depreciates to a value, but all those accessories that are fitted to a commercial, they're depreciated to a net present value of zero.
Yes.
So you're right. So therefore, if you've just bought a $50,000 ute and put another $40,000 of kit on the back, well, that, when you go to trade it in, that 40 grand's worth nothing. Yeah. And your ute might be worth 10 grand.
That's it.
So you really want to depreciate that as long as possible, not turn that over, or find a solution to repurpose that onto another. You just swap it from vehicle to vehicle.
Yeah. And as you can appreciate, we're all pretty busy. That's probably, you know, if the car itself is still working, why would I? You know, what's in it for me? Yeah. And I think, again, the industry, it's funny, it's actually almost the biggest mystery I know that only a certain chunk of people ever buy new cars. I know about 30% of new car buyers disappear back into used. You know, so we've always got this used to new, new to used kind of cycle going on as well. So fun fact, about 30% of the market in any given year is someone coming out of a used vehicle, you know, to buy a new car.
Ben, in terms of a question for me, has purchase intention changed or evolved?
What we're seeing is that, again, people are pushing out their intention. So essentially, there's just this indication that the proportion of people who are intending on buying in the next 12 months or 2 years is just down. And frankly, on intention, it's an interesting kind of question, and I've had a bit of a look at it recently. People's intention, is a very variable thing. A lot of purchases are triggered by sudden need, right? The car breaks down. But nevertheless, people who say they intend to buy in 4 years, most of them have got no idea. They're not looking at all. They just think, oh, it's about when I'll do it, right? So when you ask people that question, what I would expect is not so much people say they're not going to intend. All they're going to do is just push it out, say, well, not right now, because I'm not sure. And I think that's what we're facing is economic uncertainty creates reticence to act. And cars will be hit by one of those things. If you don't need it, they won't. And so we're seeing the proportion of the market who intend to buy in the next 2 years declining. And I suspect it's going to get worse. Again, I'm still waiting for some of the real mid-COVID stuff to come through. But I suspect that as the harsh realities of the economic situation we're walking into, I think it's a decline that apparently will make the GFC look like a walk in the park. I think it's going to get even harder. We're not going to get wages growth. We're not going to get unemployment is going to be up at the 7, 8, 9%, 10% mark for quite a number of years. It's funny, I almost talk about it. There's the necessary part of the market that will always exist. But the industry is growing and doing well when there's lots of sugarcoating or frost on top or whatever you want to call it, the cherries. The cherries have dried up because these people who are wanting to do something because they want it or they desire it, the discretionary spenders are the ones that have pulled back. And that's what we're not going to see for a number of years, unfortunately.
And has there been a change over the last journey? Like we've seen this, we've gone from local brands, local manufacturing. It used to be very much, you were an Australian car operator, and in the 70s you had the Japanese brands came to the fore. Yep. Then you had the Korean brands kick in. Then you had the Europeans come back in again in the early 2000s. We often talk about the 10-year overnight success of Volkswagen, where they sort of went from very small volumes in, say, the late 90s to being a very serious player in the Australian market now. Has there been a trend in what you're seeing with the New Car Buyer Survey around the brands that and the adoption of alternative sourced product from different countries? Is there migration one way or another?
Yeah, look, absolutely. There's been a couple of little cycles that I think that go on that I think are interesting. The first one, I think, is reflective of, let's call it culture. And I would say Australia of the 70s was pretty white, pretty parochial. We were multicultural, but certainly not anywhere near the way we are now. We certainly were parochial and national. But that also meant that there was a culture of, I guess, the macho male, let's say. And that was the thing that kind of brought the brands of Ford and Holden through. However, there was a couple of things that kind of have happened. And, firstly, I think it was multi-car ownership. I'm old enough to remember when Japanese cars were dealt with a little bit of suspicion, but the Aussies were good. But what I think happened was that people started buying those cars. It might have been a little Corolla or something. And I sat it in the garage. That was the wife's, and I sat it next to the Commodore. It was funny. The Commodore always kept going back to the shop, but that Corolla never did. It just kept going. So gradually over time, people realised the Japanese were good quality cars. And so culturally, we moved away from the Aussie-ness of a Ford and Holden, and we were a bit more accepting of these Japanese brands. And then the Koreans turned up. And ironically, a couple of things have happened. The market is pretty good at educating itself, but it takes time. I mentioned before the length of ownership. So I've always said to a brand, it's about a 10-year journey to move, because that's about how long it takes to get about half of the market through the market, if that makes sense, in terms of the cycle. So what I can absolutely see, and it's been a really interesting journey since about 2010, is the Koreans. At that point, they were generally thought to be poor quality. Whereas these days, those brands, the Koreans in particular, have gone up significantly in both in perceptions or in actual quality, but also perceptions of quality. It used to be that a Hyundai was something you didn't want. These days, people are, you see a lot more of that really positive feedback. I bought a Hyundai because the last couple I had were great. So we've kind of become a little bit more accepting of the Koreans. The old European stuff still exists, that somehow anything out of Europe is better, or certainly out of Germany, not supported by the evidence. But equally, I think we have an unusual taste in cars. We kind of like a bit of European handling, but some of the kind of American muscle, in terms of shoulders and the lines. And so there's been a bit of an influence of that, with the Ranger and some of the bigger utes. But Jeep obviously came in and really soared for a while, but the market educates itself quickly these days. And social media means any misstep means it captures you. If you don't manage that well, you suffer. So I think, if anything, we're broader than we ever were before. We're far less parochial, and the myth that Australians would prefer to buy Australian has been well and truly debunked. I was doing a lot of research on it in the noughties, and it's what people think they should say. But the minute you said something like, oh, the one from Japan's got a cup holder in it, and the one from Australia doesn't, which one are you going to pick? We'll take the Japanese one, thanks. It was that shallow. So, I think the thing that's interesting, particularly, we've only got 2 brands at more than about 10%, and a whole lot in that sort of 5 to 8, 10%. Whereas in the not too distant past, you had 3 up top, and then we saw Ford and Holden declines, Mazda rise, Hyundai rise, Kia's on the rise, Volkswagen's there. There are so many more players. Too much choice, almost, for everybody to survive.
Then, in terms of, you've spoken about economic conditions tightening in that, where do you see the average purchase price? And do you think that will change over time?
Look, it is changing, but ironically, not as much as you'd think. When I was in my teenage years, which is now quite a long time ago, I still remember seeing ads for Corollas for $19,990. That's how much a car cost back then. It's not much different now. House prices have tripled since then. So cars, in a lot of ways, are actually cheaper than they've ever been. But what we are seeing, though, is the average price of the cars bought has actually gone up a little bit. However, what is interesting, there's a couple of things doing that. One of which is it's the medium SUVs that are doing it, right? That they simply sit in that 35 to 40K bracket. They're the dominant segment. But that's also being driven by the fact that the market is older and wealthier. In other words, the market itself is shifting. So, the mix is changing it, and the buyers are changing, ergo the price is going up. However, one thing I did find absolutely fascinating, when you look at the growth of Lux, right? And this is another thing that's driving average prices up. Lux has grown dramatically in the last 10 years. However, the interesting thing is the proportion of the market over $100,000 has barely altered. In other words, most of that luxury stuff is in that sub-lux space. It's in this kind of, 50 to 100 or 50 to 90K. The A classes, the Q1s or the Q2s, the Q3s, the X1s, all of those sort of, let's call it the sub-luxes. So that's pulled price up. But that's, again, as much to do with older buyers having the spare coin. And yet the industry's kept prices down. It's cheaper than it ever was. So go figure.
So, Ben, a question around satisfaction. Now, this is where from a new car, we talk about customers will either put you out of business or be loyal and keep you in business.
Yeah.
How's the new car dealer satisfaction survey? What are the trends that you're seeing in the new car satisfaction survey? And what are the key drivers for satisfaction or the alternative, dissatisfaction?
Really interesting. That's a really interesting question. Now, I'll start with an observation that most CS programs or CX programs, whatever, customer satisfaction programs, are kind of flawed. Why? Because they only talk to customers who bought from you, right? So that's the only people we tend to interview, because no OEMs and even the dealers don't really talk to the people that they lose, right? So a couple of things happen, right? About 8% of sales in any given year are lost, or potential sales are lost due to dealer experience. That's i.e. when I first turn up, right? It happens for one of two ways, ironically. You show me no love at all, I get ignored, I get treated as though I'm irrelevant or not a real shopper, so I walk out. On the other side of it is I get too much. I'm pushed too hard, it's too high pressure. It's like, whoa, leave me alone. So again, it's about a skill set balance of the salespeople. So there's that kind of little part. That's kind of what I would always call the first date, or because a lot of ways going to buy cars is a bit like a blind date, right? You turn it up, you kind of don't know who's going to show up, but if you make a good first impression, the chances are you will buy from them, right? Because a couple of fun little things in there. The average, 27% of the market last year only looked at and actively considered the car they bought. So in other words, wow. 1 in 4 buyers who come into your dealership probably aren't looking at anything else. I mean, there are models and brands get that more often. You can probably guess at them, but generally, and then a further 25% on only actively search for one other vehicle. So you're talking 50% of the market really only look at 1 or 2 cars, which is amazing. That's prevalent in the ute market, prevalent in small cars because of history, less prevalent in the SUVs where there's a little bit more. But even amongst the medium and small SUVs, the average punter looks at only 3 vehicles or less. So again, less than 10% of models even get on the list. So as a brander, as a marketer, you've got to sell my brand, sell the brand to me first so I can even look at you. However, so that's the whole getting you there. But dealer satisfaction, it's funny. It's a good old example of how culture interplays with service. The biggest pain point that customers have after purchase is when the bloody hell am I going to get my car? It's the classic old thing of as soon as you sold me the car, you forgot about me. I'm no longer important, or you lied to me about where the car was, all of those sorts of things. So essentially the breakdown, you did a good enough job to sell a car, but you lose the customer between order and delivery. And I think that's kind of, and if anything, that is the time to create the relationship with the customer, is understand that they are anticipating and waiting, really excited about this new car. But by forgetting about them, you're actually exacerbating the problem.
With the data that you see, what are the good behaviours to manage that order to delivery communication and space?
Look, the couple of things I would really suggest that dealers do. The first one is to, firstly, don't lie. If you know the car's going to be late, don't bullshit. You will get caught out. Almost certainly. It probably depends on the estimated length of time. I think the OEMs could do a much better job, a lot of them, to help the dealers have visibility, line of sight of when the cars will turn up. But I think the most important thing, particularly for the longer wait, is to almost agree with the customer, discuss the communication pattern with the customer at that point, and then do what you say you're going to do. Stay in touch with them and be sympathetic. If there are delays, we've got lots of data that we've replicated year after year that shows that if you don't get caught lying, but a car is late and yet you've kept the customer informed, it does no damage to your customer sat at all. Customers understand that things happen. What they don't like is dealers hiding and not answering calls or returning calls. The more you can be proactively sharing a customer's excitement and anticipation and make that delivery, if they want it to be, a really good experience, then I think you can get around a lot of the problems. The other thing that I think we also do, as a lot of dealers do, is treat all customers the same. The more I can look at the customer in front of me and even just ask little questions about, look, for example, how often would you like me to call you about when the car's coming? What sort of delivery would you like? Do you want me to take you through everything, or are you really just going to want in and get out? Do you want a bow on it? Or whatever it happens to be. Anticipate what that customer is. If it's special for that customer, make it a special experience. We talk about this idea of peak end and about how memories are created, and your memories of events inform your future behaviors. If I left that dealership with my new car feeling like they loved me and they wrapped their arms around me and looked after me, I'm going to leave feeling great about that dealership. I'm not even going to question coming back for service. Of course, that's where I'm going to go because I trust them. And I think the biggest word is just trust. Don't break the trust of the customer, and do unto others as thou wouldst have done unto you. I don't like quoting the Bible, but it's a fairly true one.
Ben, in terms of ownership and service surveys, what are the major trends on that side of the business?
A couple of things that are happening there. Everybody's getting better. So that's the thing that is actually making it difficult. Like, I can tell that everybody's focusing on it, and in general, it is getting better. However, the broader trends of walking away, from dealerships afterwards, after warranty particularly, is still fairly solid. One of the things I've been really interested to see is, or a couple of things really. Most customers don't leave because we caused them to leave. Specifically, we didn't do anything in particular. But what we didn't do on the whole was give customers a reason to stay. Now, what I mean by that is that I'm sure we could all come up with examples of, say, restaurants where, you could go to McDonald's and the food is, it's food. It'll fill you up, but it's not great. But a good restaurant that has great service, it costs more, but you still keep going back there because they look after you. And I think the problem with most dealerships is that they're not good at creating that sense of care and knowledge of the customer. Partly that's to do with the processes, partly it's to do with the staff turnover, but too many customers feel like they're a number. They're not, it's not, hey, John, good to see you. How's the car? That a small guy can give you. The other thing I think that happens though, so there's that kind of aspect of the relationship. The other problem is, I think, as margins on new car sales has got smaller, the dependence on service profitability has gone up, which means that there is a bit of a tendency to try to sell things that customers don't need, right? That, almost not quite ripping me off, but not far off. In other words, you're trying to milk service for profit. And if that happens, again, you've just got most of the customer leaving simply because the value for money isn't there. They don't understand why. How can a Kmart Tire and Auto be that much cheaper? Even with genuine parts. And I can't quite tell, I don't know the economics of a dealership's service department well enough, but that's the feel I get, is that it's the service department is propping up the sales department, which means it's under pressure, which means it doesn't necessarily always do the right thing by its customers because there's a lot of overheads being carried. And I think that, in other words, that's that kind of relationship between sales and service. Everybody is getting better, but actually the other thing I think is really interesting that nobody really does well, a service center could and should be your biggest sales channel. Because if you're getting cars through there and you're having good conversations with your customers when they turn up, you may well be able to identify in any given day more than a couple of customers who might be interested in a test drive, for example. So a couple of things I think are wrong. Your departments don't work with each other, don't view it, service isn't viewed as a sales channel. Pressure to make money means that customers just too often get taken advantage of and customers just quietly walk away. We didn't build the relationship. I remember doing a study a long, long time ago, and it found what people really want from a dealer is to be their trusted friend in the automotive industry. Most people don't know much about cars. They don't think much about them the way we do. If a dealership can show it's got the customer's best interests at heart, you got a customer for life. But too often, it's what matters to the dealership, not what matters to the customer. Great example of that, where I think there are a lot of big opportunities. I mentioned before that 50% of the market's over 50. A good chunk, 25% of buyers are retired. They probably have an hour in their day to wait for the car, and B, would probably prefer to not be without their car for a whole day. Now, why on earth do dealerships not say, well, I can book you in for a service. So it's only a normal service. I can book you in from 10:30 till 12. Why don't you turn up at 10:15 and we'll have the car back. You're back in the car by 12. Got a comfortable waiting lounge. No, drop it off at 7. Join the queue. Pick it up at 5. The dealerships create their own problems for some reason when they could in fact solve a customer's problem and their own by simply booking slots. For example, by asking a customer about what their day looks like and how they can serve the customer. Instead, it's all about them and the service manager wanting to know, have all his cars in a line, ready to go. Rather than, think about the loan cars you'd save and if you could get 50% of your customers waiting, think how few loan cars you'd need and how much less parking you would need.
But I think that's a good point.
Too few dealers think about it.
Yeah, because if you categorize your customers into different categories, then you can offer some sort of service and not necessarily provide the service for nothing. So I always use the example of you buy a hamburger in a hotel at 3 in the morning, you will pay significant more than you would normally pay. So
Yeah.
depending on what your customer wants, provide the service and you can still charge for it. And it's the same thing, an older customer coming in, you're saving money, so you could maybe offer some sort of discount for providing that service where he actually waits for his car.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think customers appreciate that. Rather than, I kind of always liken it to being, I'm treated like a number that I should be grateful for giving the dealership my service rather than the other way around. And I think any dealership or OEM who can really flip that customer centricity will win big time in the long term, because it will be noticed. It's like, wow, you're actually thinking about me. I don't know what the occupancy rate of a lot of waiting rooms are, but I suspect it's far less than it could be.
Now, Ben, another question around service, because the service, as you rightly point out, it's a massive profit center for the dealerships.
Yeah.
And it's also a way of retaining a relationship with your customer, given they're keeping their cars for a staggering 7 years on average, or 7.8 years on average. So there's lots of opportunity to fix, and if you're customer centric, be that trusted transportation partner for them. What are you seeing as far as trends with fixed right first time? Because with the technology in the cars, is that actually getting worse or is it getting better?
Interesting. So before I get to the technology, the mechanical stuff has got a lot better. They're really, that barely exists. And you're right, technology is the biggest problem. We certainly do see evidence that there is a degree of error between steering wheel and seat, shall we say, human error with the way this stuff is used. So in other words, the customer gets it wrong, but we also see that it is problematic. There is no doubt that some of this stuff is a little bit problematic. And sometimes I think it's because the car companies have been displayed a little bit of hubris, shall we say, about their desire to be technology, not engineering, when in fact they probably could have left it to the Samsungs and the Apples and the real technology companies in that space, if that makes sense. So there's fixed right first time, generally pretty good. The number of problems is generally much lower than it used to be. And certainly the dominant problem area now is technology. But it's not, sometimes it's design related. And I can think of a couple of OEMs where it had a lot of problems reported, but it wasn't really a problem. It was just bad design, if you know what I mean. So that, where it was just not intuitive or didn't work very well. But look, as they increasingly go towards I guess what I would call a system whereby the main console is simply an interface with your phone, I think some of that stuff will get less. That kind of pairing is getting less problematic. But there's some other funny things in there too. I kind of always find, to go back to servicing too, OEMs still put maps in their cars, like the old sat nav, and then charge you $300 to update it. Google gives it to me for free. Why would I pay for it? There's some really funny little things that I think OEMs kind of forget. They want to be the center of the world, but they've not really understood the customer. But generally technical stuff, and it's getting harder, but they're pretty well trained. So not really a problem with their fixed right.
Then in terms of dealer satisfaction,
yes.
This has always been a really key point for a lot of OEMs to how do they drive that dealer satisfaction. And we're seeing challenges in the market with dealer profitability down, being some issues now with some brands leaving the market. There's talk around investment costs for dealers. What do you see the trends in dealer satisfaction and how do we drive that?
Look, it's an interesting one. Macro trend, it's down across everybody. Some are bucking that trend. And I think that, as much as you might wish it to be otherwise, profit is a key driver of dealer satisfaction. However, what we do see is, some OEMs that are making money, they're, for their dealers, those dealers are pretty happy. But in general, what we see is the unhappy dealers are the ones where they don't really sense where the brand is going, or they're not getting a good line of sight, or they don't, the product decisions that are being made don't make sense to the world that the dealers are seeing. But if anything, it's almost the secrecy. It's that kind of let's call it the ivory tower tendency to not tell anybody. So, I think most dealers want to be treated as a real partner. And certainly in my time, I've worked with them, and watched OEMs, I guess, get closer and then further away from their dealers. And the more they keep their dealers under their arms or with their arms wrapped around them, the happier they are. Tell me what's coming. Help me understand what I need to do rather than whack me with a stick. There's too much carrot and stick rather than genuine support or partnership. Tough world, not making a lot of money, and I reckon some of the noises that a couple of the OEMs are making around moving towards agency kind of scenarios, like Honda, like Toyota in New Zealand. I think Merck made some noises about doing that in Australia. I think that'll be getting people pretty nervous. Dealers, I don't think, know what their future is.
So what actions, Ben, do OEMs need to take to have a good relationship and have that positive engagement with their dealer network?
I think the first one is to make it a true partnership. But the second is to act as a protector, I think, between the OEM's volume desires and the realities of the marketplace. I think that's probably the biggest one. Is my read of it is that the dealers feel like essentially the local OEMs are hospital passing targets through to them, sticking on a couple of dollars on the way through, saying, figure it out for yourselves. In other words, they're not taking responsibility for, and they're not pushing back at the OEMs. They don't do enough modeling about what is realistic in a marketplace. What would you need to do to achieve a target? So I think that if the market could just ease back on, you'd have heard the joke, if everybody got their sales targets, it's a 2 million market, right? If we could just get a little bit of reality, if we could all get down to modeling about a 1.2 market, I think we'd all be a little better off. So look, that's not true of everybody, but essentially dealers need profit back, I think, and they won't change, I don't think, or won't get happier until they start making a little bit of money. Equally, if they were making a bit more money, I reckon they would be more open to assistance or guidance or whatever with the OEM to create a brand. I will put one other little thing on that though, and I think this is that we don't often think about it. Most dealers are now multi-franchise, which means they don't sing to one master. They sing to their own master, not to the OEMs. And I think in this, we have our biggest problem is that a car brand wants to be a brand, but yet it's represented by exactly the same people who represent every other brand. In other words, it's really difficult. The business model makes it very difficult to be a brand. And equally, what it's doing is allowing or empowering the multi-franchises to say, well, I'm not going to support you because your offer's not as good as the other model. So I'm going to push everybody that side. So the whole industry's got itself, we've now got with the AHG AP Eagers, that's, I think, second biggest or third biggest seller in the country in total volume. They've got 17% or 16, I can't remember what the number is, but it's horrifically large. They control what they control.
So an OEM, if I just look to summarising some of the points you've mentioned there, Ben, so communication's an important part and engaging the dealers with visibility of the product pipeline, also business processes and practices. You mentioned targets
Yes.
and having realistic targets for dealers to set or to achieve. Given that, as you say, we add up all the targets, it equals a 2 million car market. Do you see that it's likely to change given that we've had a couple of months where factories were closed? Right now, the potential is for there to be some realistic resetting of targets on the back of COVID, and where these manufacturers will say, right, this is what my stock is going to be lean anyway coming in. So this is a chance for the volumes to match the market, which means realistic target achievement and some good delivery experiences, et cetera, that flow on for customers.
But I certainly hope so. I really do. Like so much, I think that we're all talking about in this, this weird world that we're living in. It's a chance to reset. And I really do genuinely hope that this is one of the outcomes from this. I think we talked before about, coming into it, everybody thought dealers would all close. They haven't all closed. Because guess what? People still need to drive and service their cars and whatever. But if we can get that reset where the manufacturers accept that the market is going to be smaller and accept smaller numbers, smaller volumes, and set more realistic targets, I think everybody's going to be happier. The question is whether the head offices are willing to do that, and if so, for how long?
But I think also, Ben, coming through from that is, I think, simplification of the whole business process and your model lineup and how you do business with dealers. Because a multi-brand environment is pretty complex, and the simpler it is, the easier it will be to deal with you as an OEM or as a brand. I think that will make the process a lot better too with dealers.
Yeah, certainly some do a much better job than others. And yeah, look, there's so many little touch points between the dealers and the OEMs as well. You've obviously got the sales arms, the marketing arms, the product arms, after sales, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's a really complex interrelationship, and some of them do it really well, some of them not so well. Yeah, I could think of a couple of brands where it's almost like the OEM itself, the local OEM doesn't see what's happening. They're almost blind, and so it hurts even further up. It's almost like it's the parent, not even the local representatives that are hurting brand. So a lot of lack of direction. It's funny. I did a study, or I did some analysis a while ago that really showed that most brands in Australia really don't stand for much anymore. They have just become retail machines. That a brand personality has disappeared, which means it is more and more product based. And I think the dealers would love to have a brand that stood for something that they could believe in, that really said something more than a piece of metal, if that makes sense. That kind of genuine brand feeling. Too many in the chase for volume, the mix of retail has gone through the roof. And so we've got this cycle to the bottom of retail where brands almost don't exist in people's minds. They're just pieces of metal. And that way we're leaving it up to the customer to define what a brand stands for.
Ben, thanks very much. I think this has been a very interesting discussion. I think we've covered some very good topics there, and I think it's given us some food for thought and some actions which probably need a lot more focus in the industry. So it's been great and thanks very much for sharing your experience. Mark, do you want to give a summary?
I've taken lots of notes, Ben, as you would expect. And really, thank you. You've covered off some amazing stuff. For me, I'm amazed that more OEMs don't embrace the data out of this. It's amazing when you outline that 50% of the market is over 50 years of age. That is just, I always thought it was in the mid 40s. Now it's over 50.
Yeah, just gradually going up. Yeah, and it's going to continue. Yeah.
And 25% of buyers are retired. So that's 1/4 of the market actually aren't working. The other one for me, which I thought was fascinating, is the actually relatively small percentage of family buyers. It's only 35%. So 65% of people are actually couples or singles. And, I know because a lot of organizations market to families and tell the family story. In fact, that's only a very small piece of the market. And obviously small cars, the migration away from small cars into medium SUVs, and it's getting back to this whole aging population that we've got. And immigration is going to be constrained over the next 2 years, you would expect.
Yeah.
The borders being closed, and we're not replacing our population because our birth rate's at 1.6. And I remember when it was with you, Ben, the 2.3. So, and the average purchase price is that 35 to 40K because that's that sweet spot for the medium SUVs, which match lifestyle, which is the biggest market segment. However, the luxury market between that 50 to 90K is still fairly robust. And this is where the retirees are coming into play and also the empty nesting boomers. So they're fascinating statistics. But when you understand that and look at, well, what's the biggest dissatisfier with the new car purchase experience? It's, when am I going to get my car? Nothing is made here anymore. So the lead times are longer. And if I'm waiting for a premium car, it's usually coming from either Europe or from the US. And that's a long lead time. So I need to be transparent and truthful with my experienced baby boomer client or 50-year-old plus client to let them know when they're getting their car and not mislead them in any way, shape or form, because that's going to lead to dissatisfaction. So then when my service experience, it's great to note that everyone is actually getting better. The product's getting better, but the processes are getting better in the service departments. However, from what you've shared with us, there still is this feeling, and this all comes, and this is the important bit, when you leave the dealership, you've got to feel good and have a good feeling, and you want to have a trusted automotive friend in the industry, which is your dealer. But if you're getting additional costs with your service for oil treatments and other bits and pieces that you feel may not really be necessary, this is where you will leave the dealerships and go outside of the dealerships for servicing, given your average retention is 7.8 years, which is phenomenal. It's not 3 years, it's not 5 years, it's 7.8. So that service experience is a critical one to keep me engaged with the dealer, to then have that new car buying experience that we talked about. So that's the critical piece. And the other bit is the dealer's satisfaction with their OEM is a critical piece, because if the dealers are dissatisfied with their OEM, they won't be looking after their customers as well.
Exactly.
And the important bit is having clear vision and being embraced as a true business partner, and having that line of sight with where the franchise is going, where the product portfolio is going, and some of the other innovations that are coming in to cater for these people that you're building that relationship for 8 years. So profitability is important, because if the dealers aren't sustainable, they won't be around in 7 or 8 years to sell the people they sold a car to today another car. So that's an important satisfier with the dealer groups, but also to understand that the dealer groups don't just have one franchise, because if they're dealing with multiple masters and they're not necessarily reporting into the OEM in the way that they did in the past. So there's a challenge for OEMs to engage with them, bring them on the journey, be very transparent with them, but also be as easy to do business as possible, whilst achieving their KPIs that they need for their overseas masters. So your organization, for me, has all of the source information to be a successful OEM and a successful dealer. So I definitely encourage as many people to reach out to you and your organization for this kind of information, but also the other information that you've got with your Ad Clarity business, to see what is actually working in that marketing space and messaging space, so that you actually get value for money and can actually fish where the fish are effectively.
Yeah.
Is that a good summary?
That's a beautiful summary. I'll leave you with one little fun fact. And this is about loyalty. And it talks to the... I love the way you summarize that relationship between the OEMs and the tension about data and this sort of stuff, right? On average, about 33% of people are loyal. In other words, buy the same brand again. Now, the biggest brand has over 50 or 60, over 50%, which means that most brands lose most of their customers at next purchase. Why? Because neither the dealer nor the OEM did anything to maintain a relationship beyond warranty, let's say, because they don't understand the length of ownership. So the whole cycle that they work on is too short. If an OEM and a dealer can work together and they can drive up loyalty, their marketing costs will go down and profit will go up. It's a really simple thing. Most brands just look careless. If you lose more than half of your customers at repurchase, that just looks careless to me.
Yeah, Ben, thanks very much. I think it's really a good point to leave us, and some food for thought, So it's a big challenge is, how do you get that retention, and what are the actions you need to do? I think some brands are starting to do it better, but I think it's still a very big challenge. It's still an area for improvement.
Funnily enough, I've been mucking around with some prescriptive models, which is like a form of human augmented AI. And using some of the data I've got, we've been able to predict not only what people will buy, but also when they are likely to buy, with a degree of accuracy that is up at the sort of over 70% kind of mark.
Wow.
Which means that even if I only know a little bit about you, if I bother to put in place some decent communication models and get the tone right, it should be easy enough to stay in touch with the customer and anticipate what they're going to buy next. Another fun fact for you: 2/3 of people change segments when they rebuy.
Wow. So your lifestyle change causes you to change your vehicle.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that average is true, including youths, where most people stay. So most people are shifting segments. Another couple of photos. The youngest average age segment, the segment with the youngest average buyer age, is either people movers or large SUVs, because old people buy small cars as much as young people. So you've got this funny little thing. So you start in a small car, it gets bigger, and then the kids leave home and you get a smaller car again on the whole. So yeah, a couple other fun facts.
It is that life, the cycle of life.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, look, it all makes sense, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, thank you. It's
Absolutely.
been, as always, an amazing discussion, and you can tell just with John and myself, we're just in awe with the information. I think your background actually is appropriate because it is this aura of information and knowledge. So it's like you're Yoda. You're Yoda of the auto industry. You have the wisdom, and thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that discussion.
Likewise.
John, anything from your end?
No, Ben, I really enjoyed listening to you today. I think there's some very good points came out of there. So I think it's going to be a good listen for our listeners, and I think there's some very good facts. And if they're not at this stage, they need to really dig into the figures you're providing them and have another look if they're not. So thanks very much.
Absolute pleasure, gents. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Cool.
That was amazing, Ben. I tell you what, always an absolute pleasure to sit through your presentations. Everyone should just tune into you guys, subscribe to your services, and listen to the information, or read the information and listen to your view of how this all works and what the future projections are, because it's pretty powerful stuff there.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, definitely. I've got a long list here. So.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Really good to see your faces again, and great to chat. Really enjoyed it. I do enjoy talking about this stuff, and I really am passionate about trying to help the automotive industry survive and thrive through this and the transition to electric cars. I think there will always be a need for dealerships. They will change shape, but it's really up to the dealers themselves and the OEMs how they shape that future. So, yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for listening today. We had a really interesting discussion. Some great points came out of that. If you're not looking at some of the data, it's now definitely worth the time to dig in and get across the detail. If you like what you heard, please hit the button below and subscribe to us on YouTube and like us on LinkedIn. If there's any additional information you'd like us to talk about, please let us know. You can contact us on LinkedIn or leave a note on YouTube. If you want more in-depth analysis or want to speak to us about different topics, you're always welcome to contact us on LinkedIn. So thanks very much and have a great day.